I'm Dori Pop. I'm the managing director of the Institute for Leadership and Social Impact, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator of this panel this afternoon. So with that being said, I would like to jump in, and this was a very scant introduction and really just covering the very, very, very basics of all the cool stuff that you guys are doing. So in the first round, I would like to ask each of you to summarize the more important stops of your career. Basically, what have you done since graduating Georgia Tech? And Maithili, I'll start with you.
Okay, thanks, Dory. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. I think it was still pretty handy. But I started Avana while I was still at Georgia Tech. And Avana, like, Dory mentioned, is an agricultural retail startup, and we are focused on, creating technologies and products that help Indian farmers become more prosperous and become richer where they are. So a very common phenomenon in India is that farmers or rural folk have to rely on urbanization and to come over to cities to sort of earn their living. And that's something that we're trying to challenge and trying to come up with products that will really help rural people become sort of richer, while they're there. So just to enlist some of the important things that have happened, we started our company in 2017. And since then, we first came up with Jalasanchay, which is the world's most affordable way to conserve water. It's basically at 1 penny per gallon per liter of water, you can conserve water on your farm, and farmers use that to irrigate crops for all 3 seasons, as well as to, take higher paying crops on their field. So that's something we did to start off with. And then, in the mix, we launched a few new products. Last year during COVID, we also started selling online, which was a really exciting process, something really cool for us to learn. And it was also interesting because we sort of operate in a digital black box. So we both had to get our customer online to make sure they had like a phone connection, an internet connection, and then be selling to them. So that entire process was a very strong learning experience for us. And overall, I think, as we've launched our products, we started just being present in water conservation. And then to expand to a lot more categories, including like dairy farming as well as onion or fruit crop farming. So to make sure that all of the products that we came up with were aligning with the original vision that we had, I think has been an important part of our research process. And every time we launch a product, we sort of go back and test and say, okay, how does this align back with our original mission of putting farmers first? And does it or does it not do that? And so if it doesn't, even if it's generating good revenues, it's something we end up discontinuing. So to sort of summarize the impact, like last year, we've worked with about 20,000 farmers in India now, which is really exciting. And we started off being present in just one state, which is my home state of Maharashtra. But now we've expanded our presence to 6 Indian states, which are out and about the central and western region of India. So I think that's a pretty handy summary of what we've done so far.
And that is impressive. And I have many questions lined up for our next round. But Lubna, let me go to you next.
Yeah, I have no idea how I'm going to top that, but I won't try. So I'll just share a bit of my personal story. So first of all, I'm really glad to be here. So thank you for arranging this. And I graduated from Georgia Tech back in 2013. And the first thing I did afterwards was, so one thing to know as a background, I came to the US as a refugee, and I'm from Iraq, and that was soon before I started my degree. So once I finished my studies, I jumped straight into corporate America as a way of, first of all, getting to know what it's all about, and as a way to also make some money, because that was something that was really necessary at the time. So I started as a consultant, as a business analyst with Accenture. And I worked there for a couple of years, but during that time, that that feeling in my head, like I couldn't shake it off, that, okay, I want to do something different, something that has more just direct, more tangible impact, maybe particularly with the part of the world from which I come. And so, yeah, I was eligible for US citizenship in 2015. I got my passport and left the US a couple of weeks later. I just, that was the time where there were thousands of people fleeing from Syria at the time, moving to Europe and crossing the Mediterranean. And there was, in that period of time, there were about 5,000 to 10,000 people a day crossing the Mediterranean, which was like a crazy amount of people. So I just basically flew right in there. And I spent about half a year just doing some volunteer work on the Balkans and like between Croatia and Slovakia and Serbia on the borders, where basically on the walking path of those refugees on their way to some Western European countries. So I was supporting a lot there on a volunteer basis, sleeping near the camps, etc. And this led me ultimately to start working with a lot of nonprofits and grassroots organizations. And I never really believed in working with big nonprofits. And I have my own reservations with how the entire humanitarian system is structured. Maybe we won't go through that right now. But I was really happy to be working with, people who are coming from those contexts and they are the experts on their own condition and coming up with creative solutions for that. So I worked for a while in Gaziantep, which is a small city in Turkey, very close to the Syrian border. So I worked there with a health nonprofit that was working with doctors and medical professionals inside of Syria to rebuild hospitals, do some operations, help the wounded. And they have a lot of also mental health programs for the refugees, but a lot of their work was inside of Syria itself. And then from then, I moved to Lebanon. I worked there for about a year. And needless to say that I was myself extremely burned out from working in that environment. And I was just needing something maybe a little bit distant from being in the fire of the crisis all the time. So it was helpful to move to Lebanon afterwards. And I worked there as part of I was the fourth person to join a team of a social startup that was basically created the first coding bootcamp of its kind in the area that was focusing on teaching basically full stack web development for low income youth. And whether they're refugees or just low income youth locals in Lebanon, and helping them then enter the job market. So they had they would arrange for them to have interviews with employers, etc. So I worked with them for close to a year before somehow I stumbled upon my PhD. So it was basically during the time where I was before Turkey and before Lebanon, while I was just working with and volunteering in those refugee camps and mostly in Eastern Europe, I had a little stop in Berlin where I was working with some social activists and some humanitarian initiatives here, helping to integrate newcomers in Germany. And while I was here, I met this professor who was the director of the Center of Entrepreneurship at the Technical University in Berlin, and we chatted, and he was like, if you ever think of doing a PhD, I mean, you have a good academic background, and he sees how critical I was of the humanitarian system, especially when I was seeing certain things firsthand and a lot of the inefficiencies and so I can go on and on about that forever. But then I was really seeing potentially those more solutions coming from the people to the people, entrepreneurial solutions, innovative, smaller solutions. That was for me how development might happen. And so looking at entrepreneurship and conflict and how it can lead to sustainable outcomes, this was something I was really interested in. And so that professor said at the time, hey, if you're ever interested in doing a PhD on that, basically, about entrepreneurship in those contexts, under my supervision, I would be happy to support. And I was like, all right. But then, I went to Turkey, I went to Lebanon, and then I kept in touch and eventually somehow got this email from him that, hey, we have a scholarship that we think we can offer you for 4 years if you do come back, if you do decide to come and move to Germany and do your PhD here. And I did. So that was what I did for 3.5 years. And then COVID came the month before my PhD defense, and my defense got postponed. And eventually I'm still with the same research group now as a postdoc for the last 1.5 years. But my work morphed a bit from just focusing on entrepreneurship in conflict areas to generally how entrepreneurship can be impactful and can be a cause or a fosterer for sustainable outcomes, and in the same time looking at some of the dark sides of innovation and technology and how they might negatively impact society and the environment. So that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah, and I think all of us are kind of nodding our heads because there's a lot of intersection between Yua's work and I'm, from an educator's perspective that is, working with students and hoping that they would understand all this. I'm like, yes, exactly that right there. So Lubna, you already answered my next question too, so you'll get a free pass on the next one. Before we move there, Jazz, let me turn it to you so you can answer this first question about what, summarizing the important stops of your career since you've graduated from tech.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. So glad to be here. My name's Jazz, our bright smiling sage of the Nanocoke Nation. And I'm a design thinking, global health consulting, and social enterprise founding hybrid professional, originally from Atlanta. I would firstly like to acknowledge the traditional and ancestral territory of the Muskogee and Cherokee tribes of Georgia, upon which I learn, grow, and organize today. And I'm really excited to share my story. It's non-traditional in the sense that, I work in a space where we talk about things that a lot of people don't talk about. I work in the business of sanitation. And it really came to me through my time at Georgia Tech, through actually one of the Institute for Leadership and Social Impacts working professionals, Susan Davis, an alumna of Georgia Tech. She was speaking at the Georgia Tech Women's Leadership Conference when I was a freshman. I started my product design degree program really sort of disenchanted by this idea of sort of creating superfluous things, right? Like creating trash. Didn't want to be a part of that ecosystem. I was looking for a way to use design thinking to drive impact. And I heard Susan Davis talking about the global sanitation crisis and how over 2 billion people today don't have access to state managed sanitation and how that disproportionately impacts the livelihoods of women and girls. And as someone that, is in higher education and was pursuing a degree, that is just a crazy reality. And so I was 18, I called my parents and I said, I'm going to design toilets, which is a very, very niche field. It's a very strange thing to tell your parents. We've been on a very big journey since then, but they've always been really supportive. Fast forward several years later, and I had the chance to be a part of an all-women team at Georgia Tech, a team of engineers and designers to create a modular toilet that we presented at the Georgia Tech Inventure Prize and Ideas to Serve competitions. And through the funding that we were able to secure through those competitions, we started a series of human-centered design pilots where we're really looking to bring humanity and empathy into the sanitation space because there's people that don't have access to sanitation. It's a human rights issue, but there's also a lot of engineering, design, and business opportunities related to that as well. So since then, we founded Wish for Wash in 2015. And so we've really formulated as a collective. So we have a nonprofit arm and we have a for-profit arm that are looking to, again, bring innovation to sanitation through culturally specific research, design, and education. So the education arm of our work has really taken off through COVID, this idea of really how do people talk about, innovate around, and build resilient communities as it relates to health and hygiene. I think COVID has more than ever really underscored the need for having resilient cities, having resilient health ecosystems through inclusive infrastructure. And so this idea of if someone in some places they're not able to wash their hands, that does impact all of us. If someone in some place doesn't have access to a toilet, that impacts all of us, and how do we create systems that reach people where they are, and in terms of their culture, in terms of their socioeconomic status, et cetera. And so as an organization, we've had the opportunity to pilot across the world, and right now we're focusing in our own backyards here in Atlanta, in the US, to really focus on building up this ecosystem of design thinking professionals in the global health and sanitation space. So yeah, I as Dory mentioned, I'm at the Emory School of Business right now, really looking to find ways to kind of further, make Wish for Wash's work more robust and independent and not so grant reliant. So the future of social enterprise and kind of what that means to be a self-sustaining entity, so that we can, have more autonomy and flexibility in this changing world that we're living in. So it's really a great opportunity to be in community with you all, and I'm looking forward to our conversation to come.
Thank you so much, Jazz, and thank you so much for recognizing the people whose land we are on. I greatly, greatly appreciate that. Yeah, both you and Maithili has been part of Ideas to Serve competition that changed a lot through the years, but I got the special privilege of watching you kind of evolve, from the beginnings of that to where you are today, and that's impressive. Maithili, really, I want to give you an opportunity. I feel both Lubna and Jess covered this in their intro. Thinking back on your Georgia Tech years, or even earlier, what were those formative experiences that guided the path that you've chosen?
Yeah, so I think it started a lot earlier than Georgia Tech, actually, this urge to be in business. So just a little bit about me. My parents are first generation entrepreneurs. So they started their company when they were in their 20s, which means I was in my twos and threes, basically. And I would always be in the office because it was like my parents didn't have any money to afford like daycare full time. So I was always in the office with them. So I would like staple and file stuff away and like look at little brochures and do these things, right? And it was always sort of my dream to have like something of my own that was like that someday. So I think I grew up just being very entrepreneurial. I would keep like every festival season, I would start my own like diya company, like it's a little like lamp company, and I would sell it for Diwali to people. So I grew up being someone that like really wanted to sort of sell, and that was my big skill. And so even while I was at Georgia Tech, I used to be like the fundraising champion for all of the groups that I was in. But I think there I sort of hit a point where similar, I think, to what Jazz said about not wanting to put out just like a trash superfluous product out into the world. I think I hit a point where I didn't want to just take any product and make it a business for the sake of it. I think I decided that I wanted to do something that had some level of social impact that was connected to it and that was direct, tangible social impact. And it wasn't just something that you sort of had to like describe 6 steps till you finally reached how you were impacting people. I didn't really want a career like that. But I think the way that, Georgia Tech helped me focus this more was through a class that I took with Professor Thomas, actually. And I think that's also through the institute as well. So the Institute of Leadership, that is not Georgia Tech. But yeah, so that was through the institute, and we really talked about a lot of different social enterprises during that class, and really explored this idea of, you do not have to sacrifice profits or revenue to make something that has social impact. And we looked at a lot of examples. We looked at them critically, sort of assessing their business models, seeing what was working, what wasn't, how were they, if you have to generate revenue, there are some things you'll have to do, but how do you do that without sort of cutting the corners of your social mission, right? So really trying to explore this idea. And I think that's when I really got into that space where I was like, okay, it's not going to be a nonprofit. I do want it to be a business because I didn't want to rely on grants the whole time that we were operating. And I think that class really gave me the confidence to say, okay, this is possible. This isn't something that's, out of the ordinary. And it's been done before. And it's really about seeing what will work in this space. I also do believe that, um, sort of being in the for-profit space in Indian agriculture is useful in the sense that it's a space where the customer truly is a population that has been intergenerationally sort of disadvantaged. So with a lot of nonprofits and larger nonprofits, which I think Lubna also touched upon, this like larger humanitarian crisis, but I think with a lot of larger nonprofits, there is sort of this problem of passing on things because, you know, the product you're giving away is free. So it's easy to pass off whatever you need to pass off because the customer isn't paying for it. So I think when the customer pays for our products, we're also upheld to very high standards, which, you know, any paying customer would uphold you to. And I think that's been a very interesting part of our work as well. And of course, you know, the idea is to serve competition. I think just the industrial engineering classes I took at Georgia Tech, all of those were, you know, different experiences that sort of helped propel my vision forward as well.
Cool. That's very cool to hear. I kind of have a mental image of your parents' business and you, and I don't know if you have siblings, but just, you know, circling around and taking in the business knowledge from very early on. So kudos.
Yeah, no, I'm the only child. So my mom always told me, so my parents' company is called MB, and my mom would always say, okay, think of it as your sibling. So as a kid, I used to be very protective, being like, don't do this to my little brother, or don't do that. Like, I had like a whole character going for the company.
The business was your imaginary brother. That's fun. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. So let me turn to another round of questions for all three of you. If you can think back on your experience so far, which is crazy because all of you are so young, yet you already have this wealth of experience. But if you were to pick one specific moment or time or just kind of realization, an aha moment, if you will, from your career or from the field, and talk about the importance of really understanding the societal issue that you're working on at that time or now, up close and personal. So maybe what were things that you thought you knew, but then you had to be open to seeing, you know, that issue or that situation or your role in it through an entirely different lens. Jazz, I'll go to you first because I know you have things to share on this.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much for this question. Yeah, I think it's so important to reflect on this. I know for me, you know, going into the sanitation space, particularly in development, there was a number of things that, you know, especially as a designer, as an engineer, as a maker, you're so excited to put something into the world and to get that feedback. But the essence of human-centered design and empathy is really, it's not about you, it's not about your end goal, it's really about understanding the end users and where, you know, the people that you are working with and where they're coming from and walking with them in that journey of, you know, whatever you're creating. And for us, that was safely managed sanitation. And so working in communities where, so we were very excited about bringing an opportunity for them to use a toilet. We were very quickly humbled and realized that there's certain communities that were just like, you know, we don't believe in toilets. Toilets are actually not something that we're attuned to. We don't want to use this. And sort of recognizing that it's not, you know, you can have the best intentions, but if there's not that community buy-in, if there's not that cultural understanding, if there's not those sustainable supply chains for the product or service to maintain itself, you know, you really don't have a shot at something that's going to be sustainable. And so I think that was a really great lesson to learn very early on in our journey was, you have to get out there, you have to talk to people, you have to put something in front of real people and actually iterate your feedback or iterate your product or service based off of the feedback that you receive. I think for us, you know, that was a moment kind of that summer after the Inventor Prize and Ideas to Serve competitions, we had the opportunity to go to a refugee camp in Kenya, where again, we had the chance to get that feedback. And I think me individually, you know, coming in as a mixed race American woman, I sort of had this understanding or thought that I would be sort of connected with the communities in ways that I very quickly realized, you know, I'm American, there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. And so it's not about me going into the community, it's about us partnering with community organizations that are already on the ground. How do we make sure that we're not biasing the data that we're collecting? How do we make sure that it's actually real feedback that we're collecting? And how do we make sure that we're not kind of coming in, helicoptering in with ideas and solutions, and how do we make it sustainable? So I think for us, it was very clear that working with female-headed households, with female translators, in some cases, us not even being in the room and then talking with them after the fact was really what was needed. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to learn from that in the development space. Just you can have the best intentions, but your presence might bias it. Your passion for whatever you've built might bias it. And if you actually want to make that sustainable impact, you have to humble yourself and sometimes recognize, like, maybe I'm not the best person to be, leading this interview. Maybe I need to partner with someone else who's a part of the community that can really get that feedback so we can actually make that long-term impact. And so for us, that's really the basis of how we operate today, really partnership-based, recognizing that we don't know everything, and then coming in with that humility so that we can co-create together.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I think that best intentions are not enough. I think that's what present day, big philanthropy should really be paying attention to. And everything you said are the questions that you listed are the questions that anybody doing any kind of global development or humanitarian work should take to heart. And these are the things that, with the Ideas to Serve competition, we're trying to really focus on. That you start, from an asset-based perspective, and that you start with a deep respect for the community and the knowledge that is in the community. Before you have anything to say, you have to learn a lot before you should have anything to say. So thanks for that reminder. Lubna, I go to you next with this question.
I mean, I cannot agree more with what Jazz just said, and I'm actually just going to build on that a little bit. So I think for me, when I left consulting and my really nice and privileged life in Atlanta and Georgia Tech, and then started, which I didn't realize how privileged it was until I went somewhere else. Or at least I got lost in that privilege to see how deep in I am. But then when I left and started volunteering and working in refugee camps for a while, and afterwards also in south of Turkey and then in Lebanon, especially when I first came to refugee camps, it was a hard, crushing process for my ego. So I came in with that mindset as like, I'm so well educated. I have the same background as the people I'm wanting to support, and I'm doing something great by leaving the corporate world and moving to nonprofits, because in my head, that was the way you can make impact. It's like you work for nonprofits and corporate is evil and nonprofits are doing all the good work. So, so naive. So when I first started, when I made that switch, I had a few moments of feeling like really my bubble was burst, and that was very challenging. If you can also pull up the picture, maybe I sent you.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was one of the places I was volunteering in was a refugee camp on the it was a makeshift camp. It was actually just the border. It was the border checkpoint, but then they had to build up tents there, and a lot of big nonprofits coming, like from the UN, the World Health Organization, the Red Cross, those like bigger, more famous, let's say, nonprofit initiatives, they came and started doing some, created some tents there, were giving those raincoats to people, but that's how the camp looked like. And these are the conditions that people were staying at. And you see these like silver, there's a silvery thing on the floor. That's one of those like blankets. It's like just basically a foil blanket that was given to people. It was really cold. It was only November, but still, I mean, summer has been finished. It's already done in Berlin already, and it's September. So we're talking about really difficult conditions. And I was there I remember having a moment looking at people and thinking, why can't we combine the intention of nonprofits and that intention to really help people and make some change with the action of for-profits? because for-profits do their market research. They analyze their customers. They spend so much time in the product development process, and they don't just come and start giving you something that you didn't maybe ask for, or trying to help you in ways where they think that's how you're supposed to be helped. And at least, for-profits know already that, no, you need to spend a lot of time with iterations from customer feedback. You need to test your product, and you have a beta test, and then you have a pilot product, etc. So you know how much time you need to invest in really getting to know the market, getting to know the people, making your processes very streamlined, very efficient, and optimizing the little, cutting waste in all your processes. I mean, I came from Georgia Tech Industrial Engineering, so my brain was like, this cannot be how things work. Like, this just does not make any sense whatsoever, that we have this in this century and people are living like that. And this is happening with people, like the people managing that situation are those with the best intentions. So how is this even possible? So that gap that Jazz just mentioned, this is exactly what I saw, and that's also exactly what I wanted to mention. It's like, that was a moment when I was like, wow, okay. I mean, actually, the way things were being done in the for-profit world that I just came from were actually on the ground, in terms of the actions, they were much more productive and fruitful than compared to the way things are done here, but just done for completely different intentions. So, I mean, if we can combine that intention and those actions together, then I think the world will be so much better.
Yes, that's a very good point. And I think we heard a lot of that with the recent earthquake in Haiti, and looking at what was learned from, the previous earthquake in as far as coordination among nonprofits and the government, and nonprofits, among themselves, and humanitarian rescue operations. So yes, just another great point on why.
I mean, one little thing, like I noticed, for example, in the camp was there were some people from the UN that flew in first class to the refugee camp, and then they were walking with their suits in the camp with people dressed with those filthy raincoats and muddy raincoats, and those were, these are the ones responsible for, how does the tent look like? Yeah, people have enough here and there. And so, I mean, I couldn't help but feel, this is not the way people are supposed to be supported. This is so far away from reality and from what people actually need. This is so unempathetic, actually. And so we really need to start just looking, we're not doing something for other people, we're doing it with them. And they are the experts in their own needs. They are the experts in their own condition. They know better what is good for them. If we want to help, then we need to listen, and we need to just, support people in a way that is actually welcome and needed, in a way that they tell us and not the other way around. We can co-create, ideate together, but not tell people what's supposed to be done and expect that to make a difference.
Yeah, and just giving people, or not taking away the dignity,
right,
of choice, and them being the deciders, of their fate in that matter.
Absolutely.
Maithili, I'll turn to you and look forward to hearing what was your aha moment. I saw you shaking your head.
Yeah, I think all of the things that Lubna and Jazz, both of them mentioned, really resonated and sort of like reminded me of one of the other experience that I've had before. So 100% agree with everything that's been said so far. I think just to add on to that a little bit, India is a very, very Anglophilic country because we were colonially ruled for about 90 years in some parts, 200 years in some parts of the country. So a little bit of a spectrum across. But there's like a huge hangover of what a smart person, what constitutes a smart person. And speaking English is definitely one of those things. So I think that, going into these communities was a really, really big wake-up call on the fact that not just everyone who talks like us or looks like us is smart. A lot of these communities had incredible insights, things we'd obviously never think of because we've never been there and we haven't had the experiences that they've had. So, I think sort of realizing that this mental image that we have of a smart person isn't always true. And so you have to be open to all the different kinds of smart, and not necessarily, equate intellect to elitism in ways in the world. So I think that was something that was a big learning lesson. And I think sort of going ahead from there was also, the idea that with a lot of the work that people do in the nonprofit and social impact sector, a lot of times people are giving their time, they're giving their money, but they're not passing on the power. And so I think it's really important to say that it's going to be the time, the money, and the power that's going to these communities, and you are really there, to serve them. And finally, I think one like smaller thing that I sort of realized was I was, in an area in Ahmednagar, which is a district in Maharashtra. And we were going past this one area, and I wanted to get out of the car to buy water. And I was with one of our distribution partners there, and he said, "Okay, not here. We'll stop at a store later." So I was like, "Okay, how come?" And he said, "Oh, so he's upper caste, and he says, oh, this is the lower caste area. So I don't want to stop there." And I think it was just super weird for me because growing up in Bombay, that caste narrative was very much non-present in my head. I didn't even register areas as, lower caste or upper caste. But also this idea that when I looked at a rural population as a whole, like when I looked at him or, other people like him, I was like, oh, this is a population that, needs to be empowered. But to think that there's a lot of, intersectionalism within that there are women there who still are just working on the fields and not getting to make any decision. And there are lower caste people who don't have any land holding and have been oppressed for years. So I think that was a very, very big wake up call that, sometimes what we'll do is we'll take a group and we'll say, these are the disadvantaged people and they're all the same, and they're not actually all the same. So even within these communities, there's like a huge sort of spectrum that, we fail to see, I think, when we try to group them as the other and just, direct all our solutions like to one target group. So I think that was a pretty big wake up call for me as well.
Thank you for sharing that. That was really powerful, and actually it answers my next question, which is exactly, I mentioned at the beginning that the focus of our impact series and of our work here in the ELC is social and racial justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion, both from a business perspective, but from a societal perspective more importantly. And what you just talked about, Maithili, sounds like a very personal journey through experiencing what that is in India. So it's not just limited to the US, and that is, that is in a way, interesting, saddening, but also in a way encouraging to see that people around the world are noticing these things, addressing these things, working to change these things. So my question is around, and Maithili, I think you already answered it on your end. So I'll start with Lubna and Jazz, and I'm happy for you to add anything else. But how do you see, this renewed focus, thankfully, on these issues play out in the work that you're doing or in your personal life, as far as with, the communities that you are in, with the social circles that you are part of? And Lubna, I'll go to you first.
I think for me personally, it's been quite a struggle trying to juggle all the different things that I think I am with with the different versions of what is the version that I think is the one that I would want to live by and present to the world. So, I mean, I was a person who left her country, like 2 different countries, to fleeing to somewhere else because of the war in my home country. And I have that part of me that I keep carrying, but I've also, in a way, assimilated to that sustainability bubble where I live, when I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are trying to do something good for the world and are very privileged, speak multiple languages, and quite elitist. That's the reality of it. And I'm somehow like I think my identity is a bit in a dissonant state at the moment, where I'm somehow trying to redefine, do I belong to any particular group? Is the world really grouped the way we think it is? Because most of the time we just create those categories of who's the other and who's me and where do I belong based on very vague concepts, and that division doesn't really necessarily exist as much as we think it does. And so for me, I think it's just a process of constant reflection, a constant reminder of where I am right now and how I came here. I had a tough conversation with a friend who's also a Syrian friend of mine here in Berlin a few days ago. I've been going through an uninspired phase of, not writing in the quality that I want to. I'm not, I need new ideas, and I feel like a bit dry. I think it happens to all of us at some point at work. And I was like talking to my friend about, I'm not doing so well these days. I'm just not feeling that I'm as accomplished as I want to be. And he looked at me and it's like, shut up and stop having white people problems. I was like, oh, that's a very interesting thing to think about. He's like, you have literally everything anyone would wish to have. And now you're just feeling uninspired for a short period of time, and you're doubting yourself and your self-concept, and, and thinking of how can I even be better? So maybe it's time to, this is a very privileged problem to have. And that was a moment where I'm like, okay, self-policing, back on track. Let's so it's a constant process. I don't have a good answer to that, except that it's just something we need to really think about and not forget, and not just, disappear into this world of, I'm doing something that is hopefully impactful, but then forget all the dark sides that come with it and all the personal challenges and the assimilations that might come into that because of the lives we built for ourselves.
Thank you, Lubna. I think that was a very authentic answer, and I appreciate it. Jazz, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important thing to reflect on, particularly in light of the world that we're actively in. There's so much unknown, there's so much changing, there's so much that's been unearthed in this time. And I think it's a good reminder to firstly recognize that when inequities or challenges or obstacles of the world are becoming apparent to some folks that might not have seen them before, it doesn't mean that they're new. It just means that you're seeing them for the first time. And I think that the reason that that's important is that there are histories kind of rooted in a lot of the inequities that have been showing up in this time that we're in right now, and recognizing those histories and how you show up in those histories and how that pertains to your identity or where you are in the world. And I think that there's power in recognizing that in terms of how you can best be an advocate, ally in these spaces. I think kind of more tangibly, especially as Georgia Tech alums, where Georgia Tech in particular has a very sometimes linear version of what success looks like professionally. And I think kind of breaking out of that, right? Success isn't necessarily just a number or a title. It can also be, how are you using your positionality to amplify the voices of others? How can you continue to lift as you climb in your journey? And what does that look like? And I think for me, sort of this idea of being a door holder for others, like the worldviews, experiences that I've had are so narrow, and there's so many other people that don't have the networks and the access that I have. And how can I use what I've been given through Georgia Tech and beyond to help showcase the diversity, these nuanced intersectionalities that's been raised in this conversation too, so that, the voices that are being fed into business and society at large are more representative of the diversity of its people. And so again, sort of shining light on the fact that, there's a lot of hardships that we've been living through, but I think some of the bright spots have been that these conversations are becoming a little bit more normalized, where people are sort of saying, hey, we didn't realize, we didn't know, we didn't have the opportunity to see, or we chose not to see, and now we're sort of being forced to see in a way we haven't had to before, and how can we reconcile that, or how can we build better? And I think sort of redefining success to this version of like this continuum, this how can I continue to grow and be better so that it's not just about me, it's not me being the next Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, the version of success people sort of have held true for recent history. It's more about how can I make sure that this next generation, or the people around me, are amplified, because when everybody is lifted, we all rise. And I think that mentality is becoming more normalized, which is really inspiring.
Thank you for that, Jazz. I really like that analogy of a continuum of success instead of a prescribed, kind of one size fits all. I'm the innovator, I solve the problems type of success image. So thank you for talking about that, and also about the importance of amplifying the experiences of everyone, not just the identity that I'm holding. So let me in. It's a quiet crowd today, so I'm enjoying getting my questions in. So maybe in the second to last round, let me ask, what would you each advise to the Georgia Tech student who's maybe in the place where you were, a couple of years ago, and what are the things to think about and take advantage of, if you're considering a career in the social impact sector? Maithili, I'll go to you first.
I always find it hard to answer questions on advice, because I do genuinely believe that every person is in a very, very unique position, not just in terms of like privilege, but also sort of, in terms of the fact of like how they've grown up and the societal and their personal expectations on themselves. So I think, if you sort of have Jazz's view on, a continuum of success, which I 100% share and I agree with, I think it would be very much easier to have a career in social impact than if you have a slightly more, or if you grew up even with a more linear view of success, which I think is very common to South Asian communities, where you have almost this path prescribed from like preschool or even preschool, if that's possible, to till you have kids, of like what you need to do at each step. So whatever I think is said about this, just take with a grain of salt. But I think my biggest advice to anybody in the social impact space, or just in the entrepreneurship space trying to start a business, would be to just do it. I think that people spend a lot of time like planning and coming up with a lot of the different phases of what they're going to do. And obviously, I don't mean like go in there with no understanding of your market, but I think really just, get like a prototype out, get like a test version out, whatever it is, like do something that's actually forcing you to interact with the consumer. Like, don't just plan everything out on a whiteboard. I think as Georgia Tech students, sometimes we can have the tendency to do that. But I think it's important to get out into the community as fast as you can, and get as much feedback as you can on earlier versions of your product, or of, your service, or whatever your idea is. Yeah, so I think that would be my biggest advice, is to plan less and sort of do more.
Thank you. And maybe I should have just said, you're right, not advice, but your experience to share for others to hear. So Lubna, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I agree that this is not the easiest question to answer. However, I would maybe just say one thing. It's really okay to feel lost and confused and have no idea what you're doing with your life. It really is okay. You will have that problem probably when you're much older, and we're all having, everyone has those crises every once in a while, and sometimes they don't feel like they're temporary and it feels like forever. But maybe if there's one thing that hindered me from, maybe being a more, I don't know, from reaching certain things that I really wanted to reach, it is just the feeling that you could have done better, you should have done more, being too hard on myself, punishing myself mentally for for just not being good enough and having that little voice in my head that says, you can do more, you can do more. That wasn't good enough. That wasn't good enough. And I agree with Maithili. I have a similar upbringing, that I come from this culture where, you know, college, and not just college, either an engineer or a doctor. Otherwise, why do you exist? So, you know, so that's what you do in your life. I didn't study either. So raised a lot of red flags. And then afterwards, I didn't choose a conventional career and make a lot of money. I made money for 2 years, and then I decided, I'm going to be poor and live off of my savings in refugee camps. I drove a lot of people in my circle crazy, because that girl has got nuts. I've heard this many times. But you know what? It's okay. I'm really happy that I'm nuts, if that's what nuts means. And I'm like, if anything, I would just say, like, if anything, that the one thing I regret is all the times I was beating myself up from not doing things the way others expected me to do them, or the way that or following those really ridiculous standards I was setting up for myself. So maybe the most thing I regret is just, you know, kicking myself when I was down. And otherwise, yeah, it's really okay to you know, be down.
Oh, wow. I think that resonates and will resonate, you know, with a lot of people, regardless of age, that will be watching this recording. So thank you so much for bringing that up and just laying it out there. Jazz, I'll close to you on this.
Yeah, no, I think all that's been said has been fantastic. And I would just add two things that have been really pivotal in my path so far. This idea of embracing failing forward. When you take a step, when you try something new, when you pursue any work in the impact space, whatever that looks like, you're probably going to experience personal and professional failures. But framing it as a part of the process rather than this is the end, I am not good enough, you know, reframing it as like, this is a point where I can learn, this is a point where I can change, this is where I can listen to people and grow and be better. That makes you a more resilient person in this work, in my opinion, which I think is important. I also think that it's very important to recognize in terms of the products that you create. Again, Georgia Tech is a very solution-oriented place. If you put something in the world and you realize it's not meeting anyone's needs, it's not working the way you think it's meant to work, accepting that and failing forward, changing it, talking to people about why it didn't work so that we're not all reinventing the wheel. That happens so much all the time. It's just amazing how much that happens. But being able to talk about why something didn't work so that others can learn and grow with you is also really important. And I would say on the flip side of that is like recognizing the importance of just protecting your fire, right? Like if you're passionate about working in the impact space, you need to be sure that you protect that in some way or another, whether that's through, your communities of support. I know all of us have sort of had that, whether that's through Georgia Tech communities, the Atlanta community, our family, our peers, our circle in general, just having people that will pour into you so that you can have your glass filled as you continue to do this work. And then finding other things, whether that's like, self-care. I know for me, I have to work out, X amount of times to stay in the work that I do, finding those things that you still stay engaged and you're present in your work so that you can be your best self. So I would just say those things and dive in. It's a great space. There's a lot of challenges to be met with creative solutions. And I think the Georgia Tech and Atlanta communities at large are well equipped to help make the world a better place.
Wow, I think that's a great place to end. And those are just some amazing thoughts to consider for everybody out there, whether they are considering social impact work or not. I think that's just sound experience and advice for anyone. So I want to thank all three of you so much. You are so dear to my heart. I've heard your stories before, and it was so wonderful to get it out there to a wider audience and have it recorded. Thank you so much for agreeing to this. Thank you for staying up in the middle of the night and late at night, and for doing this after a long day of working and studying, and for sharing so openly and authentically. I think that's what it will stay with a lot of people, definitely what will stay with me. And let's do this in a couple years to see where you guys are. I would love to to repeat this and hear what were the next great things in your lives that resulted from this point on. And I do wish you all, all the best and the best of luck with all the important work that you're doing in your personal lives and in the lives of others, in the businesses that you're leading or will lead, the organizations, the communities that you are part of and will be part of. I know it's, beyond the Yellow Jacket pride, there's also my smaller but even stronger, Institute for Leadership and Social Impact pride that we could be part of your story in a small way. So thank you for being here and for spending this time with us.